Good evening. Welcome to the November 19th edition of the Downers Grove Village Council meeting. We're glad you're with us tonight. On either side of the room are agendas for tonight's meeting if you want to follow along. If you're watching at home, if you go to our website at downers.us, you'll find in the lower left-hand corner a link for this week's meetings. That same information is available there. Before we get started, we're going to open our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance, and we've got some help tonight in getting that kicked off. Den 2, Pack 86, come on up. You guys ready? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, guys. Good job. April, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Gray?
Here.
Commissioner Culvaney?
Here.
Commissioner Sadowski-Buchan?
Here.
Commissioner Wallace?
Here.
Commissioner Earl? Commissioner Jose? Mayor Barnett?
Here. Thank you, April. Before we get started on our meeting this evening, we have a presentation tonight from our state, State Representative Ann Stava Murray. We're glad you're here. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Yes, thank you. So for those who are not familiar with the calendar of Springfield, we just finished veto session last week. And so I'm just going around to different municipalities that I serve. I serve a large part of Downers Grove for the 81st District to give everyone an update on the status of what went through Springfield and what didn't go through Springfield. So we did have a very robust veto session, which included a lot of things that were not veto overrides, which is not necessarily a best practice that I personally endorse, but we were able to do some important things. One of the important things that we did while we were down there was pension consolidation. And so pension consolidation in what we did refers to the police and fire pensions. So this is very applicable to the municipality. And the way that they are funded currently are that many municipalities have a wide variety of funding levels. And so some municipalities are more funded. I think the most funded municipality I had was 75 to 80% funded. And the least funded municipality I had was maybe 30% funded. Downers Grove was right sort of in the middle. And so as we were looking at it, obviously in the long term, how do we get these funded better? We've had to use taxes, or a lot of municipalities have had to opt to use taxes, and because state law requires that they're on a path to be 90% funded by a certain year. That's not in a near distance, but we require essentially that municipalities make up the difference. And so that's been a pressure for property taxes to be higher than if, for example, the investments were performing better. So this was looking at investment performance. And basically, when we have all of these many, over 600 smaller funds, the money can't be invested in a way that generates the best returns because there's too high of a risk to one small pool of money. But if you have a much larger pool of money, we could see returns increase by at least a few percentage points in most of my municipalities. And so I actually made them do the breakdown of the most similar fund that we have, which is the IMRF, which performs very well, and that's for municipal employees. And when I had them compare how our funds have been performing, so in Downers Grove, the fire and police pensions, last year, the investments lost about the same amount that the municipality took in via taxes. And so obviously, we don't want investments to be losing money in that way. And so there was a whole financial analysis as well that the governor's team led, as well as negotiations between everyone that is involved in this. So between people who represented the police, people who represented the fire protection districts and firefighters, and as well as the municipalities were represented. And so they basically came to this negotiation where we are going to consolidate the funds to be managed together. Now, some people were scared when I was first mentioning this and said, well, it's not fair, we shouldn't put it all in one pool of money and we'll be less funded. But don't worry, that's not how it works. Every fund that goes in gets a percentage share of the gains, and they're kept in a separate fund, so your funding level doesn't change. We're not taking from Downers Grove and giving to Cairo money. We're simply putting all of the investments together to have a more powerful investment vehicle. And so that was something that passed on a bipartisan basis and will be implemented over the course of the next 3 years. So we're hoping that that can reduce some pressure on the municipalities and also on the police and firefighters who are relying on these pensions as well. And so we want to make sure that we're doing best by everyone, so that was a big piece that went through. Very quickly, the other stuff that went through was a marijuana trailer bill. And so we cleaned up language to make it very clear that it's private space only. So the park districts had asked us to include specific language that said consuming marijuana is not legal in parks, which we were glad to add because that was the intent of the original bill. We also responded to feedback from first responders, so police and fire, that they wanted the default to be that no police and fire are allowed to consume while they're on the job or in their free time. And so we allowed for that unless it is negotiated as a piece of their contracts. And so the default, though, is that it's not allowed for first responders to be sure of safety. And the original marijuana bill, to be completely clear, allows for employers to say that their employees, so specifically this really impacts something like nursing, say that their employees are never allowed to consume recreational cannabis. And so that's something that's consistent. And I believe there were a few other tweaks. There was a constituent of mine that had medical cannabis, and when we changed medical cannabis when we legalized recreational cannabis to say that people under 21 were not allowed to smoke it. Some people have conditions where they were over 18, so a legal adult, but under 21, and their condition is not treatable with the other forms of cannabis. And so we allowed them to still qualify for the type of medicine that applies to them. So those were the main pieces. The final main piece was that we also allowed for a shift of municipalities to start their tax sooner. And so if you apply for the tax by the deadline, it can start June 1st instead of several months later. Beyond that deadline, there's various timelines of when you apply and when it can start. And so there are some specifics there, I think, that obviously all of you would be interested in. But by and large, this marijuana trailer bill, again, also was bipartisan in passing and negotiated because the recreational cannabis has happened. Then the other major things, obviously, in Springfield, ethics remain a challenge. We have had several indictments and questionable practices that are disturbingly normalized in Springfield about what the status quo is. So there was a very small bill that came out on adjusting lobbyist disclosures. It was also supposed to include statements of economic interests for legislators, which I was happy to also support that portion of the bill and gladly would release my broader statement of economic interest, which also has like not applicable on all of the things. Unfortunately, the case for many representatives is that they do not want other people to know their financial information. And so there were not enough votes. That aspect of the bill was not called to the floor. And so that is something that will need to be worked on. And further, it's very difficult with Springfield. Like in our district, we had a competitive election. To give you an idea, though, there were maybe 5 or 6 competitive elections in the state. And so with the high level of appointments, it's definitely a very big struggle to be working on this ethics reform. That's not to say that it'll never happen, and we'll fight hard to push it forward. I just want to be totally direct with everyone that I understand why sometimes it's very hard to trust Springfield because there are conflicts of interest and people do not want them exposed. But that does not include me. I'm happy to have all stuff exposed for legislators. And then the final thing that I wanted to mention was there was a additional gambling bill that passed. This just required fingerprints for people applying for casinos, and that allows for our vertical infrastructure to move forward. There was no special tax rate for the Chicago casino, which we were asked for by the Chicago mayor. And I think negotiations remain. DuPage County was left out of the proceeds of the original casino gambling package. And so I and some of my colleagues were asking for money from the admission to the Chicago, if there's a Chicago casino, a certain amount of money off of the admission cost to go towards mental health and behavioral health in DuPage County. And that sounded like something they were willing to work with. They did not put together the votes, and there was not enough support for that to pass. And I think the other major thing that we were concerned about as legislators, and we basically said, please hold on and let everyone, including the lawyers, take a look at this, was opening up the state to lawsuits from other people who have applied. So that did not move forward. That's going through further negotiations, but we're hopeful that if it does move forward at some point, at the very least, there can be more investment in behavioral health in our area. But that pretty much concludes, so thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Appreciate you taking the time to come by. Don't be a stranger. Come back.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, moving on with our meeting. We have minutes of previous council meetings to approve.
Mayor Barnett, I move that the council adopt the meeting minutes from November the 12th, 2019 as presented.
Second.
Any comments? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. This takes us to the public comments section of our meeting. We have several of these throughout the meeting. This first section is for anybody who's here this evening and wishes to speak on a subject not on an agenda item tonight. So if you have a subject matter you'd like to raise for the first time this evening, please go ahead, step up to the microphone, tell us what's on your mind. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the agenda. There'll be similar opportunities at each agenda item going forward. With that, we have a consent agenda this evening.
Mayor Barnett, I move that the council adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Any comments on the consent agenda? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you. Takes us to our active agenda. This part of the meeting is our subjects on which we'll take action tonight. Our structure is such that we generally do what's called a first reading, which means we'll talk about something one week and not act on it. Then typically, sometime thereafter, often the next week, we'll take action. That's our active agenda. So we have one item on tonight's active agenda.
Mayor Barnett, I move that the council adopt an ordinance authorizing a special use for 2300 Wisconsin Avenue, Unit 318, to permit a personal vehicle repair and maintenance business as presented.
Second.
Thank you. Are there any audience questions or comments on this active agenda item? This is a special use in the Ellsworth Industrial Park. Okay, council comments or questions? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you all. And that is all that's on our active agenda this evening. That takes us to the first reading section of our meeting. These are now items which we are going to discuss tonight, but will not be actually taking any affirmative action or votes on. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Baker, since Mr. Fieldman is on IR.
Thank you, Mayor. We have 2 items on tonight's first reading agenda. The first is a motion to accept the plan for the future of downtown. I have a brief presentation introducing this item. The draft plan is being presented this evening following a lengthy process that involved extensive engagement with key downtown stakeholders, including the Future of the Downtown Ad Hoc Committee that met over a period of several months, a formal and informal conversation with the Downtown Management Corporation Board, and engagement with commercial and residential property owners. The issue to be addressed relates to the identification of sustainable funding sources for downtown-related needs following the December 2020 expiration of the TIF, or Tax Increment Financing District, and SSA, or Special Service Area. This plan identifies those sources of funding and proposes steps for implementation. I'll briefly summarize the key points of the plan in the next couple of slides. First point, the plan establishes a new special service area that, and here are several attributes of that proposed new special service area. It would maintain the existing boundaries of the current SSA and exempt all condominium and townhome properties that exist within those boundaries. It also sets a maximum rate of 1% of taxable value of the property. That rate is currently set at 1.5%. The SSA would expire after a period of 10 years, fund Downtown Management Corporation operations and beautification and landscaping enhancements that would be coordinated between the village and Downtown Management Corporation. And the collection of property tax revenue would begin in fiscal year 2022 as part of this special service area. Just thought I would show how those boundaries appear on the map. The external boundaries of the map shown here represent the existing SSA boundaries, and the 6 pieces of property within those boundaries are the locations of the townhome and condominium properties that exist in the current special service area. So those would be exempted or excluded as part of the proposed SSA. The other key components of the plan include dedication of parking revenues no longer needed for debt service. Beginning in 2022, those would fund parking deck maintenance and implement parking system enhancements. The proposed enhancements are consistent with a parking study that the village is nearing completion of. Council can expect to see that in mid-December. And it would also continue to fund existing general operations and planned infrastructure improvements from existing village funding sources, subject to annual budget authorization. So those represent the 3 key points of the plan. In terms of implementation, there are primarily 2 steps that, if the council accepts the plan and directs staff to proceed, that we would be undertaking. Those would include the revision of the operating agreement with the Downtown Management Corporation. That agreement is set to expire with the expiration of the TIF and the special service area. And secondly, implementation would include preparation of the special service area ordinance and related documents. And both of those items would come back to council for final approval. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mike. Council members, do we have any initial thoughts or questions we want to discuss this evening? Rich?
I'll hold my questions or comments till after public comment.
Okay. All right. All right, is there anybody here from the audience that'd like to address this item? Either asking questions or giving us their opinion on it? Please, come on down.
Yes, David Rose. Just by way of background, could someone explain why what an SSA does, and then what the difference between an SSA and a TIF is? I guess what I'm trying to understand is, if there wasn't the need to use an SSA in this situation, what would be the consequence, other than the funding not arising? And then, related to that is my question regarding the point that the townhouses and the like are being exempted. If you could explain the rationale for that as well.
Mike, you want to try that, or you want me to jump in? There's a lot there, David. There's a good questions that we should get into the record. Thank you.
Actually got some information here. We provided some information to Downtown Management Corporation that answers several questions related to this topic, including this question that Mr. Rose just asked. So I will refer to that information right now. His question about a special service area. It's a property taxing mechanism that allows local governments to collect taxes and deliver services directly or through the use of contracts with other parties to limited geographic areas within the jurisdiction. So in this case, the boundaries that were shown on the map earlier will allow for the collection of taxes that will be redirected into that geographic area. Tax increment financing is an economic development tool that allows the village to capture revenue from the growth in the assessed value of property also within a defined geographic boundary. That's a very overly simplistic explanation of TIF. Obviously, there's quite a bit more to it.
At the risk of saying something wrong, I'll expand a little bit. The TIF and SSAs are not necessarily mutually dependent on each other. We have a TIF, as Mike said, is a tool by which you can manage the process of funding redevelopment or economic development. It generally is applied to areas that are struggling. It fixes a tax rate for all those taxing bodies other than the village, and allows the village to capture the taxes that increase over the period of time. The period here is 23 years. That's part of the state law for TIF, correct? An SSA, it happens in this instance, we put an SSA in place at the same time to fund our Downtown Management Corporation operations. We have other TIFs in Downers Grove, or SSAs rather, in Downers Grove. Do we still have the one around Prince Pond, for instance? So there are other situations where certain small geographical areas would expect or would ask for services delivered by the village that are exceptional to those delivered elsewhere. So for instance, dealing with a pond. The maintenance of a pond is kind of an extraordinary service requirement compared to the other 18,000 parcels around the village. In this case, Downtown Management Corporation is an entity that exercises and does work that benefits the downtown. And so we decided 23 years ago to best fund that through an SSA, a special tax levied on the downtown properties for that work. Am I missing anything? I hope that helps a little bit. They're both, sort of 8-hour classes in and of themselves, but they're not mutually dependent on each other. That's the main thing.
Just wanted to add, and I apologize for
Yeah,
the
please.
noise, why the exemption. After
Oh, thank you,
lengthy
yeah.
discussion with the stakeholders, the owners of property, it appeared that not only from their perspective, but from the perspective of the leadership of Downtown Management Corporation, that most of the services to be funded by the SSA inure to the benefit of commercial properties, not residential properties. And so hence the request to be removed from the funding mechanism, the taxes, and that's what ended up in the plan.
Yeah. Thanks, David. Sure, come on back.
So just to be clear, the SSA is saying that it's the uniqueness of the area that's necessitating the SSA.
It's the uniqueness of the services that the area is asking for.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if that wasn't available, then, or what am I trying to ask? If it wasn't available, how would it be handled? How would the funding of that be handled?
It probably wouldn't be. The SSA is, this is, again, we're talking in way oversimplified terms here, but the SSA is kind of self-imposed tax, if you will. It's not really. We're imposing it. But it's that if there was no SSA, those activities, the Downtown Management Corporation and the activities they engage in, and some of the uses of those funds for the downtown would simply not be there.
is this something that's unique to Illinois? I guess what
I
I'm,
have no idea about that.
that's what I guess I'm trying to...
It's not unique to certainly Downers Grove or the suburbs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'm just trying to, in asking that, understand what, if it is unique to Illinois, what other locations, how they handle it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience or comments about this proposed plan? Come on up, please.
Hi, my name is Leo Stark, and I'm a resident of the 930 Curtis Street condo building. I think for the sake of the record tonight, I think it should be made clear, if I'm not mistaken, that another reason for SSA2 and a substantial amount of the revenue raised from SSA2 was to help contribute to the retirement of parking garage bonds.
I'm not sure that's exactly right. I don't think that's probably the case. Those
That
are probably GO bonds, right?
Entirely the 1.5% levy is spent only on DMC?
The
As
SSA,
currently configured?
just to clarify, this is where the overlap of an
Yeah.
SSA within a TIF district
No, I'm
got a
talking
little
about
confusing.
Yeah, so
the
there,
1.5% levy.
so there's the levy that's the current levy on
Right.
downtown that is extraordinary to the rest of property
understand
immediately
that.
adjacent, is two parts. It is not all SSA. Some of it is debt service.
So what happens when you overlay an SSA and a TIF is that the frozen initial value times the 1.5 SSA goes for the services in the SSA, and all the incremental property tax value goes to the tax increment financing district. So that was the result, but it was not a stated service in the SSA. That's just what happens when you put them on.
You overlay them on top of each other.
So the result is a significant amount of money generated due to the 1.5% SSA rate did go into the tax increment financing district, and the number one payment was debt service, not just for a parking deck, but for all of the bonds that were used for a variety of reasons over the last 20 years.
So it's not, it wasn't an intended purpose, but yet it was a consequence. And so that's why,
probably a
that's
good way
one
of
of the
putting it.
main differences between the expiration of SSA2 and the anticipation of a new SSA, is that it's the intended purpose, and the tax levy is to more directly support Downtown Management Corporation and the efforts of the beautification of the SSA. The other thing I'd like to call your attention to is there's a substantial number of e-remarks from residents on this matter, and also that there was very vigorous resident participation in DMC meetings on this topic. And for those from the village who were in attendance could testify, the way this is set up as a funding mechanism, which naturally naturally causes the participation of both residents and corporations in something that many of the business members see as a business member-oriented organization, meant that there were very heated meetings because it was a tax rate and an organization trying to serve two masters. It was trying to serve the interests of the residents, which did not necessarily match the interests of the businesses, and the businesses had a substantial interest in the continuation of DMC. And so it was really almost with the vote of the resident managers participating, the resident board members, it was a vote on all parties' behalfs to, in essence, get a divorce. And to let the SSA go ahead with a much clearer intention, serving one specific interest, which was the Downtown Management Corporation and the businesses of the downtown, and more clearly aligning the event calendar and all the participation in conferences and meetings where they go to help to develop leads for downtown vacant stores and that. When you read the agenda of what DMC does, what the group does, it's very important, but it also is very, very, very highly oriented to the businesses only. So that's our perspective in terms of why it's appropriate at this stage with the expiration of an SSA to start with a blank piece of paper and have that sort of blank paper mentality that says when we start a new SSA, what are we trying to accomplish? And who would be the people that would pay, as you said, this sort of super levy? A levy on top of properties not taxed otherwise to areas in the village. So that would be my comments for the night.
Anyone else? Please, come on down. Wait, hang on one second. We really need you to come to the microphone, because there are folks at home that we want to be sure that they can hear this as well.
Steve Mulligan, I live at 4929 Forest Avenue, and I've been a Downers Grove taxpayer since '71, property tax and everything. And I'm trying to understand with this SSA, how many downtown people that live downtown are positive for this unjust taxation. I mean, to me, I heard that there was a chance that we could ask for option 3, where the downtown condo owners could be excluded from paying this tax. I mean, right now,
What's proposed tonight is exactly that. That the
Okay.
downtown condo owners, including your building, would be exempt from the tax.
Say it again?
What's proposed this evening, not for action tonight, but what we're talking about taking action on, would be exactly that option, that the downtown
so-
condo owners, like 4929, would be exempt from the tax.
Okay, that's the posture that I would totally back, and I believe that there's not one person that owns a condo in downtown willing to participate and pay this SSA. Okay, I know I've read some emails where the board said, well, we wouldn't have any control over what goes on. We don't have any control now, and we're paying the taxes. So I think that the downtown management group should think about ways to get funding for their management and stuff. But it's so you guys are in agreement with that the homeowners don't really care to continue paying this tax. I mean, right now, that's my tax bill, I'm paying 20% towards the current SSA of my taxes every year.
What we're doing right now is, we have a recommendation that's based on those meetings you're talking about,
Yeah.
that would suggest to take that course of action. We're going to decide if we agree with that, but that's the recommendation coming to us.
Please don't blow it.
Sure.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Stephen Gigailo, 4913 Main and 4908 Highland. I just had a question. The DMC board approved the proposal, but there's one addition here that wasn't part of the proposal, and it begins with the word "and," beautification/landscaping enhancements to be coordinated between the village and DMC. As a commercial property owner, we went through the process, and I agree with everything that's been said, and in the spirit of working together, the commercial property owners agreed that for the most part the DMC was necessary and would benefit us. But we felt that snow removal, landscaping, beautification, that was in general common areas and was really enjoyed by everyone. And so in looking at this proposal, and what we had discussed was the commercial property owners funding DMC. And when you look at this proposal, there's an extra $100,000 that is proposed to fall under the SSA. I submit to you that during the discussion before the proposal, there was a lot of discussion about the rate between 0.75 and 1.0, and that if the DMC budget was lean that year, then perhaps it wouldn't even reach .75, but we had a ceiling to work with. But never was that discussed, landscaping and beautification enhancements. So I don't know where that came in, but I can tell you that the commercial property owners are not for that part of this proposal.
I appreciate that input. I can tell you that I was at probably 2 of those meetings and 5 or 6 of ours, and that was a component that was mentioned in all of those, whether it was exactly $100,000, but the addition of beautification and landscaping efforts above and beyond the current was part of what was kicked around at all of those. If DMC, sorry, 2 different acronyms, if DMC was against this, that it's not like that was added post-DMC's recognition of the plan. That just isn't the case. It's not that DMC said, we want 1.0, and then we stuck in $100,000. That didn't go that way. So I appreciate your point of view, and I understand it. We'll certainly kick that around, and we'll double-check some stuff, but I don't believe that's the case. Any other comments from the audience? Okay, going back to the council, additional comments or questions for this evening? Rich?
Yeah, I have a few comments. When this thing was first presented to me, I think it was probably at the booth at Rotary Grove Fest, and a condo owner living downtown said, I think it's patently unfair that we have to pay 1.5%, and all we get out of it is snow removal, some landscaping, and some holiday decorations. And I thought, yeah, that is patently unfair. I think that's way too much. And I spoke early about having a more fair amount. Then as the phases went through, we received a lot of emails, and many of the emails say, well, we don't mind investing something into the area we live, but it should be proportional, that we'll pay something for the services we get. And then we'd struggle back and forth with what were the percentages. We listened in the community room and things like that. There were the separate meetings with DMC and the stakeholders, and the only thing that seemed to disappear totally was the proportionality. And the way I read this, and I try to understand things pretty clearly, particularly before I vote on them, is that the people, residents who live in downtown Downers Grove will now get free snow removal, landscaping, and holiday decorations. And it's going to be paid for by the general fund. So people who live in El Sierra or Denver Woods, or where I live near Downers Grove South, will actually be paying for those services. And I'm a little surprised that the residents didn't want to pay for anything, not even $50 a year for those services, or some small tax amount. So totally agree the 1.5 is unfair. I also feel that the residents should have a voice in downtown management and should feel like they're part of it, and enjoy the festivals and enjoy the things that come from downtown. So that's my opinion on this.
Thanks, Rich. Greg?
Thank you, Mayor. I want to start by thanking staff, the DMC board, everybody that's come out to a meeting. This item started as a high priority action item a little over 2 years ago. So this has been a long time coming. And there's been a lot of work on it. I don't know how many public meetings, I don't know how many Downtown Management Corporation meetings, and a ton of work went into it. And so I want to thank everybody top to bottom. Obviously, it's not quite where we started, and I'm not sure it's where we all expected to be at the end. I'm a little surprised that residents are willing to give up their seat on the Downtown Management Board, but so be it. That's the recommendation. It came unanimous from Downtown Management that this was the option that folks were in favor of. I think it's great that we were able to reach that unanimity. I have actually heard from at least a couple of folks who live downtown that were willing to pay some SSA, but I guess that never really got legs within downtown management, and that's not what made it into the plan. But I think what we've got here is a balanced plan that takes care of our current needs, has an eye toward the future in terms of parking, in terms of beautification of downtown, and I think it fairly equitably divides the breakdown. Looking at page 11 of Mr. Baker's presentation, with SSA property owners bearing 28.4%, general taxpayers 42.6%, and commuter parkers picking up the rest. It's not, like I said at the top, it's not the divide I thought I would see at the beginning, but I think it does handle our needs both now and into the future, and I look forward to voting for it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Greg. Anyone else want to jump in? I'll just add something a little different. I want to thank, and I don't know who their names are, but our village council leadership, our village leadership, both on a staff level and at a council level in 1996 and 1997. Because whether you moved in here 5 years ago and don't like your tax bill, or you moved into Downers Grove in 1962, it's impossible to not recognize that this TIF and SSA, which has been a little complex and not exactly anybody's perfect match, but that organization has caused us to have a downtown that is simply an envy around. Our downtown is, in many ways, exactly what we set out to make it 30 years ago, before any of these folks were involved up here. And the vehicle by which we accomplished that was the Downtown Management Corporation, funded through an SSA and a TIF overlay with some big-time investment on the front end. And so here we are, divorce, in one way of putting it, and those are never exactly what anybody wishes, but what you do hope is that everybody moves on in a way that's profitable and successful for them, and I think this plan takes us down that road. I'll be supporting it as well. But for anybody that's sitting out there reflecting back, or those watching at home, I want to say thank you. I mean it, to the group in 1996 and 1997 that was sitting up on this dais and decided our town was worth investing in and going through some of the challenges of management since, because it's absolutely a success, and I'm thrilled to be here. So thank you to them, and thank you to everybody else as well. We will be discussing this one more time before we vote, so it'll probably be on our next meeting's agenda, but keep your eyes peeled for that. We'll move on. Dave's shaking his head. It's not going to be next time? I'm sorry. I think we're still waiting to receive a final report on the parking information, so it'll be coming up in sometime in December. Thanks, Dave.
Next item on the agenda is a continued discussion of the fiscal year 2020 budget. Staff does not have a planned presentation this evening, but this represents the fourth opportunity for discussion at a public meeting on the village's budget.
Thank you, Mike. Let's start with the audience again. Are there any audience comments or questions concerning the FY 2020 budget that we're kicking around for now the fourth time? Okay. Council comments or questions?
I have
Rich,
plenty,
go ahead.
but I'll let the other commissioners go first. I have a list.
Go ahead, jump in.
Okay. And I don't expect answers on all of these tonight, but the first question is if we could add back just 2 of the 70.43 full-time equivalents headcount reductions that have been made in the last 10 years, where would staff add those 2 and where would they best be utilized? And do we know what their fully burdened annual cost likely would be? And if you want to defer that to the future, that's fine.
So, Commissioner Coleman, if you're referring to the email received, we had planned to answer all those questions in writing and share them with the public and the council prior to the next council meeting on this.
Okay. It's okay if I continue?
Oh, absolutely.
reading the record? Okay.
We don't have any answers prepared off the top right
The next one, does the Economic Development Corporation and Downtown Downers Grove Management Corporation have adequate funding to get the job done? Number 3, are we maximizing grants? Number 4, has the village contemplated another grade separated crossing at the Burlington tracks? Number 5, are we maximizing opportunities for intergovernmental cooperation? Then some specific questions on page 4-35, line 12. What are the other financial resources of $500,000? And regarding the library's budget, I don't know if we have the purview to ask about specific items or if it's just a straight up and down vote.
Go ahead and ask. We'll see if it's easy to answer.
Do we know how much of the library's personnel increase of $377,625 are new full-time equivalents?
We'll ask.
Okay. Page 5-4, can we add seek out opportunities for intergovernmental cooperation as a 2020 objective. Page 5-10, do we have education and development plans in place for each employee? Should that be an objective? Page 5-12, add new look for downersgrove.us as an objective. Do we have the cybersecurity audit as an objective? Have we selected an ERP selection and implementation team? Next, under section 5-16, can we add continue historic preservation efforts as an objective? So that would be under community development. 5-18, how could we better advertise the village? This was under the communications section. And page 6.5 in program F0-001, as of May 2019, there were 1,587 Parkway ash trees with 600 more to be removed over 3 years. Do we know how many we started with? In other words, how far along are we? Are we 3/4 of the way through or what? Program S11, has the engineering for Jefferson Brookbank sidewalk connection been completed? And those complete my questions. Thank you for the indulgence.
Thank you. I wish we were done with ash trees. Be ready to be done with that anytime soon. I'm sure we'll get some answers pulled together for those. There's always a learning process for all of us up here, and those questions are good ones that will get answered, and we'll talk about the process, how we get to those answers. Anybody else in council? Okay, that ends our first. Oh, David, go ahead. Come on up.
I don't know how germane this is or not, but in light of Representative Stava Murray's calling attention to the consolidation of the pension funds, can you talk about what, if any, consequence that has on Downers Grove specifically?
Very briefly, the immediate effect is there isn't any, because it's going to take a little time. The pension consolidation allows, fundamentally, it's a bill like this, but fundamentally allows for two opportunities to increase future gains in the pension funds. One is it allows for some different investment opportunities that may provide some larger returns because the size of the total funds being invested has grown. The second thing it does is it allows for a reduction in the overhead administrative cost of those investments. Instead of 7,200 little pension funds, there is now one bigger pension fund. So all those overhead costs go down as well. The idea behind it generally is to remove those costs and look for opportunities for larger investment gains to have those future investment gains be maximized. What that means for Downers Grove is we hope the effect will be that future increases in pension contributions will be lessened. Future demand on pension contributions will be lessened. Right now, about half of your property taxes, slightly more, go to pension contributions. Those are projected prior to this bill to increase it at pretty substantial rates for the foreseeable future. Our hope is that the result of this bill a year or two from now is that we will see those demands slightly decrease. But immediately in 2020, nothing. Did I do that okay? I always have to check with the team that really knows. Okay? All right. So that ends our first reading section. Manager's report. Is this going to be Mike or Scratchy Dave?
There's no report tonight, Mayor.
All right. That's probably just as well. That takes us to our mayor and council member reports. This is a point in our meeting where council members can bring up new subjects that they're interested in talking about or highlight ongoings in our community that are of interest to them or they think might be of interest to the public. And so with that, we'll start with Kavanaugh. Your report this evening.
Mr. Mayor, no report.
Greg?
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
Rich?
Yes, a brief report. The Downers Grove Historical Society last Thursday held a very successful History on Tap pub crawl where some 192 people got to learn a little bit of history about the various restaurants and a lot of new people that learned a lot of things about our history. So it was a great turnout. It was our first annual, and pretty sure we'll be doing it next year as well.
Thank you, Rich. Leslie?
I actually just want to remind everyone that on Friday, November 29th, we've got the tree lighting ceremony at 4:30 p.m. So join us at the Main Street train station where the mayor will be turning on the lights with over 1,000 ornaments by local youth, including my daughter.
Awesome, thank you.
Just a reminder, the Bonfield Express is nearing. You can still register at bonfieldexpress.com. It's Thanksgiving morning, November 28th, 8:30 a.m. The weather is going to be absolutely spectacular, so please make sure you register.
Is it?
I'm just,
Thank you.
I'm just glad we have that on tape.
We do.
Fantastic. I don't have any report except to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. And hopefully you all will have an opportunity to enjoy your family and friends during that time and get a little breather from real life. And also take a minute to remember those that aren't as fortunate. If you look, you will find somebody who is in need somewhere, someplace. And there are going to be lots and lots of opportunities over the next 5 to 7 days for you to help. So if something moves you and you're looking for an opportunity, please leverage one of those, whether it's food pantries or churches. If you look for it, you'll find an opportunity to help. So let's all try and keep that in our minds. Rich, I just have one question about, nobody had to drink out of an old boot at Keeshe's, did they?
That was not true that I did that, so.
That pub crawl was a great event. I managed to catch the tail end of it, and it was fantastic to see so many people enjoying our downtown. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.